Good morning, greetings from Jakarta, Indonesia. My name is Adelina Kamal and I'm the Executive Director of the AHA Center. Excellency Ambassador Igor Drisman, EU Ambassador to ASEAN, heads and representatives from the National Disaster Management Organization of ASEAN member states, ambassadors and representatives from the ASEAN member states, ASEAN dialogue partners, sectoral and development partners, partners of the AHA Center, today's panelists, colleagues from the AHA Center and the ASEAN Secretariat. We are proud to welcome all of you to the public launch of the second edition of ARMOR, the ASEAN Risk Monitor and Disaster Management Review. It is a major publication of the AHA Center where we attempt to bridge science and decision-making. Through this publication, we present selected topics that are relevant to the ASEAN region with science as the basis. And we present them in a comprehensible manner to assist disaster managers and practitioners in making decisions to reduce risk and save lives. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as you may be aware, the AHA Center just turned 9 years old last Tuesday. So you may ask us, why did the AHA Center produce ARMOR? Why can't we just refer to scientific and academic journals or the global reports and statistics? Why bother? As required under the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, while ASEAN member states shall identify risks and analyze them, it is the AHA Center's job to consolidate those analyzed risks and provide synthesis so that we have the bird's-eye view of our risk profile and the potential regional implications. As the AHA Center is also tasked to facilitate one ASEAN, one response, we also collect data and information about response efforts, the needs, gaps, and actions on the ground. We have responded to 35 disasters within just 9 years. So we have first-hand information from our interaction with ASEAN countries, partners, and stakeholders during these response operations. So we ask ourselves, why not producing an annual report that provides not only the current state of risk specific to ASEAN, but also share critical analysis that are evidence-based to inform actions on the ground, to inform decision-making. At the end of the day, when we monitor risk, what we want to achieve is that someone is doing something about it. Risks are reduced, actions are taken, and more lives are saved. So that is what ARMOR is all about. For this second edition, we decided to focus only on one issue, climate emergencies. As we all know, while everyone is so focused now on COVID-19, climate crisis leading to biodiversity collapse is a much larger issue. It is a big issue for everyone to worry about, including the ASEAN community. Our Earth is melting, and we have seen before our own eyes the impact of climate change to disasters in this region. Time is running out. ASEAN should act now against climate emergencies. The AHA Center is fortunate to have received great contributions for this second edition. We work with 25 authors to produce 9 quality articles. So I would like to express our appreciation to all the authors, as well as the board of reviewers and the board of editors. We are also grateful to receive the support of the European Union through the EU SAHA project, strengthening of the AHA Center project. Later today, we'll have a talk show to discuss the first 2 articles in the ARMOR second edition. And this is just the first of its series, as we will have 3 more webinars to introduce the other 7 articles. At the end of today's session, we will also announce the topic for our 3rd Armor next year. We will keep doing Armor annually to keep the conversation going. We are prepared to continue to bridge science and decision-making to create a more disaster-resilient community in ASEAN and to realize the vision of ASEAN becoming a global leader on disaster management by the year 2025. Thank you, and have a great day ahead.
Executive Director, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. I'm pleased to be here at the presentation of the 2nd edition of the ASEAN Risk Monitor and Disaster Management Review, or ARMOR, which is supported by the EU as part of the EU SAHA project. EU SAHA stands for EU Support to the AHA Center, which is a €10 million program which we started in December 2019 to improve ASEAN's capacity to respond to natural disasters and humanitarian crises. This area of work is no coincidence. The ASEAN region is one of the most disaster-prone regions in the world. Between 2004 and 2014, ASEAN espoused more than 50% of global disaster mortalities. The main aim of the EU SAHA is therefore to reduce the loss in lives endured by these disasters and limit the impact on the economic, social, physical and environmental assets in ASEAN. ASEAN has set in place robust legal and political mechanisms in terms of institutions, systems and processes to respond to these disasters, notably the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response, or ADMER. As a driving engine of ADMER, the AHA Center has demonstrated, in spite of its young age and still limited size, that it is capable to do great things in supporting the disaster-affected ASEAN member states. We're happy that EU SAHA, both directly implemented by AHA Center and a consortia of Swedish Contingency Agency and Estonian Rescue Board, is now in full swing. I'm also happy to see that there is a good chemistry between the agencies, as was visible in the recent output of the capacity needs assessment exercise. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the recent mega flooding, forest fires, hurricanes and super typhoons has become a new normal. Let's make no mistake, this is due to climate change. Along with ocean acidification, which kills our marine ecosystem and bleaches our coral, the rise of the ocean temperature breeds more frequent, more intense, and more deadly disasters. Over 2019-2020, we witnessed the impact of peat and land fires in Indonesia, tropical forest fires in Brazil, and bushfires in Australia. These disasters tell us that no matter how advanced the country, how advanced the country in disaster preparedness notably, our capacity to respond to them is still too low, given the enormity of the scale of these disasters. We always believe there is a technical solution to this, and that someday a tech whiz-kid may save us from the calamities, while in fact we need a political solution to address the root causes of climate change. This is why our work on disaster management should go hand in hand with climate change mitigation. Distinguished guests, this year has not spared ASEAN. We have seen the recent cases of Super Typhoon Goni and tropical storms Linfa and Nagna affecting the region. Even during the COVID-19 crisis, climate-induced disasters show no sign of declining. These disasters, combined with protracted crises, such as the inflow of refugees, has led to a new so-called riskcape in the region, including the climate-induced, pandemic, and protected slow-onset disasters. this will require structural response. The rise of multidimensional crises such as the ones we are seeing these years is unprecedented. Such crises require strong collaboration, cooperation, and of course solidarity. We should be combining our efforts, skills and talents to overcome the resources limitation. Ladies and gentlemen, preparedness is as important as adequate resources. However, there will be neither good preparedness nor adequate response until we invest substantially in monitoring capability. The EU is very proud of its satellite capacity in monitoring disasters by harnessing the power of satellite imagery produced by our Copernicus satellite, combined with strong research culture spearheaded by the EU Joint Research Centre and the 24/7 Monitoring Centre, notably the Emergency Response Coordinating Centre, an area where there is much scope for further cooperation. Today's report testifies to ASEAN's commitment to monitor risks and disasters on a continuous basis. This will give ASEAN an evidence-based and scientific input to support operational decisions and will serve as a feedback loop mechanism to improve policies in the future. Also here, collaboration is key. Let us join forces and learn from each other. With this, it is my conviction that our partnership will grow from strength to strength. I thank you very much.
Good morning again. Thank you for joining us in this Armor 2nd edition public launch and webinar. This is the first webinar series of the 2nd edition of Armor, the ASEAN Risk Monitor and Disaster Management Review. As mentioned earlier, this is one of the key publications of our center. Last year, we started the Armor journey, introducing the first edition called Bridging Science and Decision Making. And for this year, we focus on one theme, that is climate emergencies. We pick the title, Time is Running Out, Why ASEAN Must Act Now Against Climate Emergencies. And that is for one particular reason, because ASEAN region has been known as the supermarket of disasters. We have everything, almost everything. And many of the hazards that we have in this region are climate related. And we have also seen the intensity and frequency and severity of these disasters in the past few years. And that is also due to the climate change. So because of all this, AHA Center decided, okay, why don't we focus this year's Armor on climate emergencies, because this is something that we need to do. We need to zero in on our region. We need to scale down the research and the scientific publications out there and the discussion to focus only on ASEAN region and see what is the impact of climate change to disasters in this region. So we have 9 articles that we would like to introduce. And for this first webinar series, we will highlight the first 2 articles. And these are the first article by Dr. Mizan Bisri from the UN University. And it has the very catchy title, Real and Present Danger. What does 1.5 degrees Celsius increase mean to ASEAN? The second article is entitled The Threat Multiplier, Climate Change and Disaster Riskscape in ASEAN. And we have co-authors writing this article together. It's a joint effort of the AHA Center and the Pacific Disaster Center based in Hawaii. And we have the authors, Lawrence Dimailik, Keith Landicho from AHA Center, LA also from the AHA Center, Dr. Joseph Green, and Daniel Morath representing the Pacific Disaster Center. So for today's discussion, we have most of the speakers. We have Dr. Mizan, we have LA, we have Keith, and Dr. Joseph Green. And we are also privileged to have commentators that will also join the conversation, and that will be Dr. Rianti Jalanti from the ASEAN Secretariat, Head of Disaster Management and Humanitarian Assistance Division. Unfortunately, the other speaker that will serve as commentator, Dr. Muammar Febri from the EU Mission to ASEAN, is not able to join us because he has a sore throat that not allow him to speak. So I hope that you are getting better soon, Dr. Febri. So we have, let's zero in on the first article. Dr. Mizan used to be with us at the AHA Center. And then he joined the UN University. He was actively involved, of course, in the first production of Armor. And for this second edition, we don't let him go. We invited him to write the main article of Armor, the center article on Armor. And that is on the real and present danger. What does 1.5 degree Celsius increase mean to ASEAN? So first question, Mizan, thank you so much for joining us from Japan. I hope that the weather is not that bad for you, Mizan.
Yes, thank you very much, Ibu Adelina, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, the weather has been very pleasant today.
Okay, so let's talk about the article. It's actually quite a short article, which is good and quite an enjoyable reading for me when I edited the article. So in summary, can you tell us your evidence to say that 1.5 centigrade increase will actually mean a real and present danger for ASEAN?
Yes, thank you very much, Ibu Adelina, for the question. And indeed, the article has been written in such a way that it consolidates the IPCC Special Report 1.5 and also some of the recent articles or research products that highlighting the climate change impact specifically for ASEAN in 2019 and 2020, because the special report itself was produced in 2018. And also, I think equally important is the other 8 chapters in the Armor. So hopefully the chapter 1 can provide and can set the tone for the readers to understand what's actually the importance of understanding climate change impact in Southeast Asian region. But first of all, allow me to humbly start by saying that the evidence is out there in the scientific products that continuously produced by scientists all over the globe, including from ASEAN, but also those from outside of ASEAN and look into the region, and also continuously consolidated by the IPCC and other authoritative bodies. And I'm sure Dr. Rianti will have a further elaboration on this. So in short, what we need to know and what we need to do is how to continuously and strategically communicate this evidence effectively to create the political push and ripple effect in policy and actions. Now, the special report highlights 5 types of reasons for concerns to climate change, particularly with regards to the impact Some are already known with greater confidence, such as the risk to unique and also threatened system that directly challenge the biodiversity in Southeast Asian regions, small-scale fisheries, and also coastal flooding influenced by sea level rise. But we have to also aware that there are some other climate change impact that we don't know yet, and more research are needed, such as impact to tourism or how it directly leads to heat-related morbidity and mortality, for instance. So what we know is, of course, several low elevation in our region is affected by the rising climate change and also the rising sea level rise. And the region with more than 50 mid and also big coastal cities, and with more than 500,000 inhabitants, they are directly at risk. And also this is in combination with the increasing intensity and also frequency of typhoon that will brings about the storm surge and also other variation of coastal flooding. And then the other clear challenge is with the greater population engaged in agriculture and small-scale fisheries, and this threaten their livelihood and also at the end of the day, the food security of the region. Another equally important is the forced migration and also migration out of the low-lying areas in not only in ASEAN actually, but also in the broader region, including, for instance, from the neighboring region in South Asia, Bangladesh in particular. And this is where we also need to start think not only cooperation within the region, but also outside. At the end of the day, this whole impact that we can foresee, the rising sea level rise, extreme event, and also climate-driven migration, all will have implications to international affairs within ASEAN member state and also beyond. And also at the same time, as I pointed out earlier, there are some reasons for concern because of the climate change impact that we still don't know what to do with it. And this include how we should manage the potential permanent displacement, for example, and also forced migration. And I think one of the chapter also already discussed about this, then this should put into consideration by policymakers in the region. And at the end of the day, the role of knowledge management services will become critical in managing and also tapping all the available research and science about climate change, not only about the climate change impact, but also the drivers of the anthropogenic climate change. So sure, perhaps now ASEAN is already building momentum in terms of DRR and humanitarian-oriented knowledge management services, but maybe from there it can be leveraged to serve other areas of resilience building and sustainable development, including for biodiversity and also environmental management in our region. So I'll stop there first, Ivan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mizan. The title of your article says real and present danger, meaning that it is in front of us. Yes. It is not 5 or 10 years from now, correct?
Right.
It is with us right now.
Right.
Can you pick up one clear example that really shows to our ASEAN community that it is a real and present danger?
I think one of the clear that already in front of us is about the impact that threaten the biodiversity of our region, particularly in the coastal areas, and also how it have a cascading effect with the livelihood of coastal communities, including small-scale fishers. And also that is in combination with the increasing frequency and intensity of tropical cyclone in the region. And we also saw the complex effect from the 2018 tropical storm Sontin. Who knows that that tropical storm passing from Philippines to Vietnam and Cambodia will bring such a devastating effect. That's also one of the scenario that perpetuated by the climate change impact. That's already here. That's the point. That's already here.
It is here already. We cannot get away with it. So the next question, I'm really drawn with one your recommendation, and it says about ASEAN, in particular the AHA Center, shall transition to a forecast-based regional humanitarian preparedness and response. And in the past few years, we have been doing and mobilizing regional response based on request and offer of assistance. So we should change. What does it mean to us here? how should we adapt to it, and how we can apply your recommendation into actions? Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. So also on that note, my point is really how ASEAN disaster management tools and mechanism will adapt and will make use of the available approach in terms of forecast-based impact modeling and analysis, and try to integrate, for instance, tools such as climate impact viewer and integrate them with the day-to-day disaster risk assessment, monitoring, and early warning systems in our region. And I think later we will hear more from LA, from DMA unit, and also from PDC, from Dr. Green. This is really at the heart of AHA Center operations, in my opinion, how the DMA and also intelligence, as well as preparedness and response, can make use of this forecast-based information, not only about the hazard, but forecast about the potential impact bring about by the climatic hazards. So this includes, but not limited to, for instance, how DMA operation or disaster monitoring, analysis, and intelligence in AHA Center will be improved, and what does it mean? What kind of products will be delivered to meet the diverse needs of risk information? When, if, and what kind of forecast-based impact analytics can the future flash updates or situation updates can provide? Maybe we will see more, a sharper weekly updates, not only reporting what is happening in the region, but how it can communicate, let's say, the sub-seasonal forecast that our sister bodies in the ASEAN specialized meteorological centers have been producing. Maybe we will see that kind of innovation to understand the forecast impact in the region in the near future. That's one hand. On the other hand, it's also essential to update the risk scenario, response scenario, and also trigger points within the ASEAN Joint Disaster Response Plan and ASEAN Resource Deployment, including offer and also request for assistance, and how the adaptation of the business process change within the SASOP should be adapted as well. So that's really my point. So to elaborate that, the risk and also response scenarios in the future AJDRP, in my opinion, should also consider a probabilistic nature of the risk under the influence of climate change, rather than the current deterministic scenarios that already have in the AJDRP with the three risk scenarios. And again, here a better knowledge management, as I discussed earlier, will be crucial. Of course, in the past 2 months, there are lots of discussion, high-level discussion about forecast-based anticipatory actions. And also, always one of the recurring themes or question is about the challenge with uncertainty, and later on accountability if the crisis did not occur after this, forecast-based impact assessment. So here, it is critical to update the institutional arrangement to address this, in my opinion. And some practices can be looked at. Of course, for example, how the FBF or the forecast-based financing is developed in Infuse in the operation processes of Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. So that is where when the FBF activation is become unused in Red Cross and Red Crescent movement, that can be directly channeled to national societies, DRR efforts. Something like that need to be think within the ASEAN mechanism, because in the past, the request or offer of assistance directly targeted for response. Maybe this sort of forecast-based need to also accommodate how, if the disaster is not happening, then what to do with all the assistance. Or some, we can also learn from what the development banks sometimes call it as the non-regret investment when they are assessing loan or grant readiness criteria to a country. And my last point on this is that I think this also can be applied to the business processes within the NDMOs of the ASEAN member states. And if it can be done, I think that there is an opportunity for better interoperability that can be aspired for. And this is nothing new. The region has tried a similar effort in the past with the ICS technical working group, for instance, to streamline command approach in emergency response. Why not a technical working group on forecast-based impact preparedness and response mechanics that can bring about a more, bring harmony between national and regional response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mizan. I read an article by the Telegraph, and they interviewed Mark Lowcock, the UN chief or UN OCHA chief. And he said that we have the predictive analytics already. We have improve our forecasting capabilities. So why don't we act early before the disaster happens? It's a no-brainer, he said. And I think UN OCHA has released the SURF for Bangladesh to anticipate for the flood. And that also allows for the humanitarian community to prepare for the release of items before the flood becomes worse. Yeah. So these are some of the examples, and you mentioned also about the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. And one specific suggestion for ASEAN to consider is to have a technical working group that will really look into anticipatory action, including inserting and making sure that our contingency plans and adapt have adapted trigger points. Okay, that is very interesting. And that actually is a good transition to Dr. Rianti Jalante from the ASEAN Secretariat. Welcome, Dr. Rianti. Thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Rianti is currently the head of Disaster Management and Humanitarian Assistance Division in the ASEAN Secretariat. And ASEAN Secretariat is basically the caretaker and the lead for the development of the work program under the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response. So I'd like to ask, based on the recommendation of Dr. Mizan, do you think that we can take this recommendation into the current work program, particular on this anticipatory action recommendation? Over to you, Dr. Rianti.
So thank you very much, Ibu Adelina. I think I would like to say thank you for AHA Center to always, very engaging very closely with ASEAN Secretariat and especially the MHA division. I think it has been really also insightful to hear, some of the explanation and elaboration with Dr. Mizan. So allow me to first see how I think these IPCC reports, also 1.5, important for us. Then after that, I think focusing on what ASEAN Secretariat and especially how ASEAN Secretariat have been implementing some of these recommendations to our ATMOR work program 2021-2025. So here I'm putting my head, of course, as the implementer of the report that I have been involved in. So with the IPCC 1.5, I was involved, especially in Chapter 3, on the impacts of this 1.5 global warming on poverty, human security, and also migration, as had been said by Dr. Mizan before. I think what's important here in terms of the title of this session, risk and present danger. Within climate change IPCC terminology, we have current impacts and also future risks. I think current impacts have been elaborated before, and this future risk is also very important. So forward-looking activities planning is important. And allow me then to explain how has this recommendation in terms of integrated knowledge management on climate change impacts, so the science of climate change, on top of that, climate change adaptation, then on top of that, disaster risk reduction and humanitarian operation. And even better, I think I would also to propose that what we are doing now is, of course, already complex, integrated, but we also need to think further in terms of mitigation later, because reducing mitigation or even focusing on mitigation will help also will have a follow-on effects in terms of climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. That's one thing. And also the second recommendation on scaling down climate change projection, modeling, and impacts assessment and regional levels. Of course, this is very important and scale is necessary, and that's why knowledge provision is important, and that's also the role of local scientists, regional organizations to be involved, because sometimes the technology may not be available, and that's also something we will discuss later. Then let me focus on the question on, what are the opportunities for these two recommendations to be part of ADMOR work program. I think I would also like to announce here, we are in the almost final processes of adopting the ADMOR work program 2021-2025. By, of course, AHA Center have been involved, but also our ACDM members from the 10 ASEAN member states. Then, so we have several points in ADMOR work program by which these recommendations have been or are going to be implemented. So first of all, integrated knowledge management on climate change and adaptations are part of our two priority programs. So priority program 2 and priority program 5. So allow me to elaborate more on these two priorities. So the element of the work plan on strengthening institutional policy framework on disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation integration is part of priority 4, especially on strengthening laws, regulation. This outlines, of course, the objective, scope, outputs, detailed activities towards this integration. I think also in this first point here, if we look back a bit, this year, the campaign, International Disaster Risk Campaign, focusing on governance. And governance is, I think, the most important and crucial ingredients towards integrating climate change adaptation and disaster risk reduction. We know that disasters are not natural. It's the vulnerability that matters. And when vulnerability exists, then we will have disasters or disaster risk. And governance is the key to ensure that vulnerability is reduced and resilience is maximized. And that's why, as part of our priority program 2, it's about strengthening knowledge, governance through tools, technologies, laws, and regulation. Then also, on top of, in terms of this knowledge provision, the second issue is that ASEAN realized that we need to continue to innovate with strengthen regional knowledge activities so that these different sources of knowledge are important. As Dr. Mizan said about strengthening capacity for local warning, local reporting, and that's also something that we will look forward into this new AWP. So science, the role of science, the role of research, indigenous knowledge, good practices, tacit knowledge in disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction spectrum needs to be utilized here. Then we have also an output related to an online platform, which is an innovation hub. It's about a platform which allows for sharing of best practices and innovation on resilient cities, because now we know that 70% of disasters, 70% of hazards occurred in cities. So focusing on resilient cities is important. So resilient cities and human settlement exposed to climate and disasters, but also sharing of tools and courses for urban planning practitioners. So here, I think in terms of knowledge, I think focusing on knowledge here for ASEAN to be, the global leaders through creation of this online platform, to creation of this innovation hub. This is something that we see very important and hence get considered in our new work program. And I think after that, I have said about this global leadership. This is very important. We have now, it's the time has matured enough. I think ASEAN, we know ASEAN as the region that is they say a supermarket of disasters. Now we have been able to turn it into laboratory of disasters. I think it's time has matured enough for our region to enable the convening of this knowledge and technology and experience, which then can be used to help, of course, to strengthen the capacity for our region, but also outside the region. And also, I think this is very important, because that's how I think learning from other vulnerable high-risk countries such as Japan. Japan, we know that Japan, they put disaster diplomacy as part of their white paper policy, their external activities, and that's also, I think, what ASEAN needs to do, and we have considered that within our AWP 2021-2025. So in conclusion, I think it's time. Climate change is here. 1.5 is will occur if we continue business as usual. We have reached 1.1 now. Business as usual by mid-century, by 2050, we will reach 1.5. And by 2100, we will reach even 3 to 4 degrees, which then, very catastrophic for our world. So it's important that within this timeline of 10 years, between 2020 now and 2030, that we first, of course, strengthen resilience, reducing vulnerability, integrate DRR and CCA, but maybe beyond that, even consider mitigation as part of our, advocacy, not our activity agenda, but future advocacy. So that's, I think, responses from ASEAN. Thank you, Ibu Adelina, for the time. Back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Excellent. Excellent points, Dr. Rianti. We're very fortunate to have you, one of the lead authors of the IPC report. So you have actually direct insights on the implication of the increase of 1.5 degree, and perhaps can really reinforce to our decision makers and also colleagues and other stakeholders on the importance for ASEAN to get our act together. And thank you for mentioning about climate change mitigation. I think we really need to have a better interface, between the disaster management community and the climate change and environment. And you mentioned that this will also be covered in our new work program. So for information of our participants, the ASEAN Committee on Disaster Management, this is the main committee that is responsible to implement the ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management Emergency Response, is going to launch a new work program. The ATMER, ASEAN Agreement on Disaster Management and Emergency Response work program for 2021 to 2025. Next week, inshallah, the work program will be adopted. And it's been a long process, a consultation process, not only with the 10 ASEAN countries, but also with the stakeholders, with various partners. Dr. Mizan was involved as one of the consultants. AHA Center was also involved. Thank you very much for involving us. And there's a lot of debate. And I think if we really take into account, and I'm very pleased to hear from Dr. Rianti that we're going to really take into account the effect of climate change into the ATMER work program, then we can make really a transformative change, right, for the next 5 years, because it is a real and present danger. Thank you so much, Dr. Mizan and Dr. Rianti. Now, let's turn to the second article. The second article, the threat multiplier, climate change and disaster risk in ASEAN, co-authored by 4 gentlemen. Lawrence D. Malik from AHA Center, Assistant Director for Disaster Monitoring Analysis. Good morning, LA. Keith Landicho from the Philippines, but also with the AHA Center. Good morning, Keith. And you're from Manila. Dr. Joseph Green and Dr. Daniel Moras, but we now have Dr. Joseph Green representing Pacific Disaster Center. Good morning. Aloha. Hope that you're well. Thank you so much for joining us. We have 3 authors for this session sharing the article. And this is also quite an interesting article, because then you'll see the graphics and the comparisons and all there, right? But perhaps we can ask the author first. LA, you wrote the first Armor, similar article also about disaster risk, right? Last year. How is it different this year, the article this year, from the previous one that you wrote last year? Over to you.
Thank you, Adelina, for the question. I would like to touch on this question in such a way that I would like to highlight the key messages, and then along the way, we will be showing the differences between the 2018 findings and the 2019 findings with the second edition of the Armor. Now, Ibo Adelina, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there is no other way to put it. Climate change exacerbates disaster risk, and that's a fact. Again, I'm saying this as a present tense because it is happening. Now, let's talk about how climate change is negatively affecting the different elements of disaster risk. Let's start with hazard. Over the years, an increasing number of studies have found strong links between climate change and extreme weather events. More frequent, intense, and longer-lasting extreme weather events is the new normal. And it breaks my heart to say this, that this scientific finding is actually not new to us. Let's take a look at the very recent experience with the successive tropical storms that affected Cambodia, Lao PDR, the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. We had Noul, Linfa, Nangka, Saudel, Molave, Atsani, Goni, Itaw, Vamco. That's nine tropical storms in just a matter of about 2 months. And these are successive, one after the other. And one of those nine is actually tagged as the strongest typhoon of 2020, which is Typhoon Goni, Super Typhoon Goni. And now let's talk about exposure. Climate change will make many areas in the world uninhabitable, triggering mass migrations. Our colleagues Mas Mizan and Dr. Rianti have talked about this already. And there is also another article in the Armor that talks about displacement. Now, where will this climate displaced people go? They go to the cities. Now, as population centers swell, so is the level of exposure. Just imagine the magnitude of devastation successive super typhoons can do in a highly dense metropolitan area. It's unimaginable. And actually, population exposure is just one thing. There is also economic exposure. In 2018, the capital stock exposure of ASEAN, the amount of our capital stocks exposed to multi-hazard, is 3 times higher than the combined economy of the whole region. Imagine how large our exposure is. And in 2019, that rose to 4 times. Now, this increase can be explained by the updated exposure metric that we use in the methodology. However, one thing remains certain in ASEAN, which is, by the way, currently the 5th largest global economy. If disaster risk reduction does not improve at the same pace as our economic growth, ASEAN's exposure to multiple hazards will continue to increase and threaten to undermine our economic development. And then third element of risk, let's talk about vulnerability. Now, recurrent disasters that are, by the way, often occurring in quick succession affect countries in the long term. Imagine how impossible it is for a vulnerable family to rebuild their houses and go back to their daily lives when another strong storm is coming. Zoom out, the same is true at the community level. And in the bigger picture, the same can be true for developing countries in the region. And it is also very important to take note that studies have observed that while impacts from extreme weather events have always hit the most impoverished countries the hardest, high-income countries are also now starting to experience the impacts of climate change more clearly than before. This has been evidenced by the impacts of disasters in Japan, in Australia, in the US. And now lastly, capacity. Although the impact of climate change on governance is not as visible as the impact of governance on climate change, links between extreme weather events and social, economic, political, and environmental pressures support the general conclusion that climate change is a threat multiplier that can lead to social upheaval and possibly violent conflict. Also, climate change and lack of coping capacity compound each other. inadequate response to extreme weather events can provoke social discontent, which can have adverse impacts on the coherence of the affected state and further weaken its governance structures. And to end, no one is safe. All ASEAN member states, including those with strong coping capacities, are increasingly at risk.
Thank you very much for scaring us, LA. Last year, I remember you talk about risk surplus, that countries that have higher coping capacities can help those with lower coping capacities. But this year, you said that even those with higher coping capacities will not be able to handle the effect of climate change. So forget about the dream for ASEAN to become the fourth largest economy in the world. Forget about the RCEP. We're not going to reach that if we continue to be basically affected by the climate change and climate emergencies. Thank you very much, LA. Now we turn to Manila. Keith, how are you?
I'm good.
Yeah, Keith is a disaster monitoring analysis officer of the AHA Center, and he has been behind the production of our weekly updates, flash update, situation updates together with LA. So let's talk about this article that you co-authored together with the other three gentlemen. This article mentioned, and we talked about it just now, that all ASEAN member states, all the 10 ASEAN countries, even those with strong coping capacities, will be increasingly vulnerable in view of climate change. So how would this 1.5 degree Celsius affect the ASEAN member states' coping capacities? What is your evidence or argument, Keith?
Okay, so just to give everyone a context, maybe just to reiterate some of the points of LA, coping capacity describes the ability of people, organizations, and systems to use their available skills and resources to manage adverse conditions, emergencies, or disasters. And both indices used in the article, I will just mention INFORM and RVA from PDC, used in the article tackled both institutional and infrastructural mechanisms. So this lack in coping capacity, it would hinder the ability of an entity, or case in point, a member state, to absorb negative impacts from a hazard event. And so what's the use in identifying the coping capacities of member states? It's an important instrument for deciding which have the greatest need for investments to improve the internal capacity to respond to hazards. So just to put maybe as a case study for this webinar, let's look at Singapore. So the World Governance Indicators of 2019, it consistently ranked Singapore in the upper percentiles of the indicators of coping capacities. So these indicators, such as government effectiveness, regulatory equality, rule of law, control of corruption, political stability, and absence of violence or terrorism, and voice and accountability. So these are just some of the indicators for the coping capacity, but not limited to these. And from the National Climate Change Secretariat of Singapore, they have noted some of the major impacts that the climate change of 1.5 degrees Celsius could have on Singapore. So here are some: sea level rise, challenges to the management of water resources and supply, the biodiversity and greenery of Singapore, vector-borne diseases like dengue, the urban heat island effect, and most shockingly, food supply, because Singapore imports more than 90% of their food. So despite the high coping capacity of Singapore, they are vulnerable to these effects of climate change. And being aware of that, Singapore, the first step to coping to these effects of climate change is being aware or having these knowledge of these possible impacts of climate change to the island nation of Singapore. So just some takeaway points. Coping capacity is a controllable factor. The indicators of coping capacity can be manipulated through allocation of resources, as previously mentioned, the social and technical infrastructures and mechanisms. However, what is inherently embedded in Singapore, it is not, which is not controllable. It is geography. We cannot alter the geography of Singapore just like that. Some things are beyond control, like the weather systems. So it goes back to the call for transformational adaptation. So the first step to that is being aware of these climate change-induced impacts. And next, to be prepared for these impacts, and this goes back to enhancing coping capacity as a way to absorb the impacts of climate change-induced impacts. In with this case, for Singapore, and hopefully for the other ASEAN member states.
Okay, thank you very much, Keith. I like what you said before, transformative adaptation, and no one is safe, including the country with the highest coping capacity. Now, let's turn to Dr. Joseph Green. Aloha again. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's quite late in Hawaii. Dr. Green represents PDC, Pacific Disaster Center, and PDC has been a long-standing partner to the AHA Center as well as the ASEAN family. And we are very happy to have PDC co-author the second article. Now, can we ask Dr. Green the significance of risk assessment? You know, we talk about risk all the time. Why risk assessment important to us, and how this could contribute to the member states of ASEAN resilience? Over to you, Dr. Green.
Aloha, everyone. Thank you, Ibu Adelina, for the wonderful question. And I'd like to thank my colleagues on this paper for the excellent information thus far. So the significance of a risk assessment. So risk, I think, is something we talk about all the time as disaster managers. We all have a concept in our head, and we use that operationally, strategically throughout the day. But the significance of a risk assessment, first and foremost, is it takes these broad, difficult to measure dimensions and concepts and breaks them down in a way that's more easily understood for those across the board. So stakeholders that may not operate in disaster management on a daily basis kind of have a window into the mind of a disaster manager or disaster risk reduction researcher. And then it allows us to look at these broadly defined concepts that sometimes can be very difficult to measure, like vulnerability. How do we directly measure vulnerability? And we break it down into effectively measurable components. And then what this allows us to do is begin to take a scalable and repeatable approach to support evidence-based decision-making. And then from that, we can begin to break down the individual components of risk and provide all stakeholders with a more explicit understanding of how we as emergency managers view risk and how risk is unfolding across ASEAN, for example. And I think the main thing that I've seen in my time working in this field, and it's, I think, transformative for me, coming from a emergency management, health and mathematics background, the socialization of risk is a very important aspect of a risk reduction and a risk assessment itself. The risk assessment opens up the dialogue for an understanding of what actually drives this complex phenomenon we call disaster risk. And what that can then do is allow us to really understand what those individual drivers of risk, what those factors that contribute to risk may be. And from that, then we can begin to truly understand what it means to fall short in certain areas and how we can begin to change and improve disaster outcomes and become more resilient as a whole. So overall, in summary, it provides a detailed understanding of current gaps and potential future failure points. And how this is significant for ASEAN and globally, actually, is that as we've seen through this wonderful webinar, is that unfortunately, these systemic shocks that we're going to face are becoming more common and intense. And what we are seeing is that they cascade from one complex system to the next. And resilience planning needs to have a solid foundation from which we can then build redundancies and contingencies. And from that, we can then contextualize. And I think this is a key important takeaway from this is risk has to be contextualized at a local level, at a member state level, at a regional level, and at a global level. And in doing so and making sure it's contextualized, we are taking that first step in achieving a new and lasting resilience that allows us to kind of look at those elements and indicators in common for systemic shocks. And this extends beyond just natural disasters. As my colleagues have mentioned, we're looking at a number of cascading events, complex emergencies, largely stemming from climate change. So where these overlap with disaster risk reduction, I think are where the key areas we need to focus on in the short term, and then begin to develop these context-specific assessments that we can then combine into a larger framework of assessment to truly understand how we can affect change measurably in confronting climate change. Thank you.
Excellent point. Contextualize risk and communicate risk. So that is actually quite a good transition to Dr. Rianti. Dr. Rianti is not only an expert on climate change, DRR, but also SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So Dr. Rianti, can I pick your brain here? How would you connect the risk factors and elements presented in the Armor article with the Sustainable Development Goals agenda? Over to you, Dr. Rianti.
Yes, so thank you so much again for the opportunity, Ibu Adelina. So allow me to see how this risk, climate change, disasters, then will influence our achievement to sustainable development goals. So I think I will pick my two, position as of course experts, but also as part of ASEAN Secretariat. So I will move in between here. I think what we know now every year from the SDG report, we know that climate change undermines the progress of achieving SDG, has undermined particular achievement, particular goal, and it is expected to continue to do so in the future. And unless we do so in terms of dealing with the impacts of climate change, reducing in terms of strengthening efforts on mitigation, we will continue to have the impact so in terms of achievement of the SDGs. So that's very clear. I think also three global frameworks that are related here: the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, Paris Agreement on climate change, and of course the Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. The common goals of these three frameworks are reducing vulnerability and increasing resilience. So I think that's also the second important issue in terms of the interlinkages between these major frameworks and concepts. Then allow me to see how then a specific SDG is impacted and add on information on how ASEAN Secretariat, our ADMORP World Program, has considered that and aims to create some program or related activities in the next 5 years in how we deal with the impacts. So first of all, on SDG 1 on poverty, we know that ASEAN region has some of the largest economies, but we also know that our countries in terms of poverty and development levels differ so much. We have Singapore that is advanced economy, but we have Laos, Cambodia that has low income low underdeveloped and lower income developed middle income countries. So that's very important considering climate change risk and disaster risk towards this particular, of course, at the regional level in terms of advancing economy, fourth largest economy in the world, but also how it impacts different ASEAN member states. That's one. And that's why as part of our activity, we have, for example, look at this disaster responsive social protection. That's very important. That's our activity for next year, which then look at, how we can use the information on climate, early warning, early action, but also ensuring that social protection that we have now is shock responsive to, for example, climate change and disasters. Then I move into the second goal on food and hunger. We know that one of the major activity or major impact of climate change is reducing yield. And we know, for example, the area of Mekong Delta, it's the food basin of Asia, Mekong Delta. And then that's why food security is very important. And for example, in ASEAN, we have we are going to, we have adopted the ASEAN Declaration on Drought. That's very important. Countries in the Mekong Delta region have identified that drought is an issue, emerging issue. It's a transboundary issue, which then will impact food security in the future. And that's why I think consideration of climate change to SDG, to our ASEAN program is important. Then, of course, the goal 13, it's climate action. Climate integration, I said before, for climate change adaptation, disaster risk reduction are important, and we have been integrating that. And our countries, the Philippines, Indonesians have been, I think, championing on the integration. But also, I think beyond that, climate action is also about mitigation. So community-based disaster preparedness, which also include information on, climate awareness, is something that we need to look at in the future. Climate advocacy, Indonesia, the Philippines, I think Philippines have been the championing, I think all countries in our region. Climate advocacy, which look at, strengthening resilience, reducing vulnerability, but even further, climate action. How can we also contribute to reducing, helping climate action, which then in the long term help to reduce, emission through behavioral changes, for example. Then goal 11, cities, resilient cities and settlements. That's also very relevant to ASEAN. We have everything here. We have, advanced cities like Singapore. We have mega cities like Jakarta and Bangkok. We have small cities, in Myanmar, in Laos, in Cambodia. So we have very highly diverse cities, and consideration of risk are relevant here. So we also have low-lying cities, small islands in the Philippines, but we also have a country or cities in areas in the upper mountains. So the risk is very, very diverse, and that's the consequences of, climate change to our region. And finally, I think also sometimes we don't consider that, but SDG 16, SDG 17, it's about partnership, it's about strengthening collaboration. And I think that's where ASEAN as a whole can contribute. I would argue that collaboration, regional ASEAN has one of the strongest collaboration, and the strongest collaboration in disaster risk reduction, in disaster management. I think that's something that we need to be proud of. And I think also in achievement of the SDG, we should not also look only looking at the impacts, but also how we can strengthen SDG 17 through our work, within ASEAN and also our work as an ASEAN Secretariat. So thank you so much, Ibu Adelina.
Thank you very much, Professor, for enlightening us and reminding us again on the SDG goals. So perhaps I could say that if we are not doing something urgently on climate emergencies, then ASEAN basically will not be able to achieve the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and ASEAN countries as a whole will not be able to achieve the SDG goals if we are not doing anything. Forget the achievement, forget the achieving the SDG and the Sendai framework goals. So Thank you so much, Dr. Rianti. Now we have actually prepared some questions for the audience. we want it to be interactive. There will be a live poll, and we're going to show this. I'm turning to my colleague, Carol. Hi, Carol. So let's start with this. Okay, we have a tool for this. It's called Mentimeter. And for our participants, if you can't open the Mentimeter, we have provided the code there, 2444509. Please open it from your browser or your handphone. We have a question for you. Are you ready? So that's the question shown with the 1.5 degree Celsius increase. Which of the following efforts should be prioritized to reduce the risk of disasters and lead to lower vulnerability? I hope that you can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 options there. So you can only choose one, right, out of the 6. I know it may not be easy, but we talk about priority here. Okay, so interesting. Okay, so we have 3 options there to choose. One is strengthening early warning system, and then number 2, enhancement of policies and governance. Number 3, advocacy, and this includes advocacy to other sectors and stakeholders, those who are unconverted, those who are stubborn, basically. Number 4, scaling up anticipatory actions, and we have quite a big number there, 10 voters. Number 4, localized disaster risk assessment and mapping. So basically, you know, going down to the local level, like what Dr. Joseph Green has said, right? We need to know our risk first to be able to do something. And number 5, disaster resilient and climate adaptive infrastructure. And that's actually the highest voters, quite interesting. And this is about ensuring that we have resilient houses, resilient bridges, resilient public infrastructure. We should ensure that our coasts are not cramped so that people are safe when you know, there is a tsunami. Okay, so we have now 67 voters. Thank you very much. So let's go to the second question. So this is an open-ended question. So you remember the 6 options that we have given you: strengthening early warning system, governance, advocacy, anticipatory action, risk assessment and mapping, and climate adaptive infrastructure. So what other efforts, in addition to the mentioned 6 options that should be considered to reduce disaster as impact of climate change? What other things that have not been mentioned? Science-based policy making, technology, community mobilization, planned retreat from high risk areas. Okay, technology and innovation again. Diplomacy, harnessing science, diplomacy efforts and multilateral cooperation. That is really advocacy. That's important. How to change the stubborn people. They're not. It's not that they are not educated. They are, but they're not converted. Okay, I see quite a lot of technology and innovation. It is there. Resources, partnership, collaboration. Okay, increase family level behavioral practices to reduce the trend of increased climate change. That's interesting. So really, down not only to community, but family. Adapted scenarios, yeah, okay. So this refers to the recommendation of Mizan as well. Change the scenario planning, make the trigger levels more advanced to allow for early action. Technology innovation again. Campaigns. Okay, so now we go to the third question. We have 47 voters already. Thank you so much for the recommendation. Now, this is going to be interesting because we're going to see, which comes more. Write one word that you think ASEAN community collectively should do now to reduce the impact of climate emergencies. Okay, declaration. Another declaration? Well, we just had a declaration on drought. And drought has been emphasized in ASEAN. But it's not only declaration, right? It has to be action. So what is this? One action. Act together, walk the talk, adaptation, policies, okay? Policies, I think that is the center so far. Updating AGDRP, okay. AGDRP is our scenario, regional scenario planning, ASEAN Joint Disaster Response Planning. Teamwork, okay. Climate justice, that's interesting. I want to talk about that perhaps to the person that mentioned. Strategize, okay. Solidarity. We talk about action here. So it should be more than just paper. Climate justice, information sharing. Okay, perhaps I can ask this question later on to our panelists, what they think about climate justice. Okay, we have how many? 50 voters? 51, it's going up, 54. Interesting. Okay, so we can conclude now. Thank you so much. Very interesting submission of ideas when it comes to one word. Thank you. So now we go to the second segment of discussion. Colleagues, panelists, we have seen what our audience has said. I'd like to go to the second segment of the discussion, and that will be taking questions from our audience. We have actually seen a number of questions. Our panelists can answer some of these questions right away by answering them, typing them. But we will also take some of the questions that we think can be discussed live. Okay, so let's see the question. While looking at the question, perhaps I can invite any of you who would like to talk about climate justice. What is climate justice? Anyone? Okay, Burianti, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I think I'm really glad that this issue came out. As of my previous point on, the relationship between SDG 1 on poverty. Of course, I think climate justice, justice and equity is an issue now, and that's also IPCC, so Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is currently, after preparing this special report on 1.5, it's preparing its assessment report 6. So climate justice within the chapter on poverty, I think that becomes the theme. And that's why I think it's important. So there are two ways by which, climate justice is relevant here. I think first one, we know that the highest contributors of greenhouse gases emission suffer the least from the impacts of climate change. And those who suffer the most from the impacts of climate change, such as many of us, many of countries within the, our region, is the least contributors of climate change. So that's also, I think, the first implication of this climate justice. We contribute the less on the causes of climate change, but we suffer the most. And of course, I think Dr. Green, I think also see that a lot in the focus in the Pacific now. So ensuring that justice and equity by which then this burden is shared and responsibility is shared is very important. So CBDR, common but differentiated principle, is very important. And also I think within the ASEAN region itself, we have countries such as Singapore, which is highly advanced, but also they still suffer from sea level rise in the future. So that's Indonesia. There has been some discussion in terms of emission from some deforestation, but then we also suffer the most. So I think that's one consequences or elaboration of climate justice. And second is that cities and communities are impacted differently. Even people living in advanced countries and cities, those who women, a particular group, women, poor people, vulnerable group, older, youth, they are also impacted differently and the most. So they are impacted disproportionately to the impacts of climate change. So ensuring that the needs of the most vulnerable and poor people is considered within climate action is one way to ensure that climate change is climate justice is ensured. And I think, of course, within the ASEAN Secretariat, portfolio and activities, maybe currently it's I think beyond our own division, DMHA, but I think as a whole, putting poverty as the heart of poverty reduction, poverty of alleviation as the heart of general ASEAN Secretariat activity. That's, I think, one way of ensuring that this climate justice is being considered. Thank you, Ibu Adelina.
Thank you very much. By the way, that is also the question of our colleague from the Philippines here, Director Texan. Good morning, sir. Maraming salamat po. Thank you for joining us. So, Director Texan also asked the question in relation to climate justice. What can ASEAN and AHA Center do relative to reduction of carbon emission mitigation and the effects of climate change and climate justice? Anyone from AHA Center or Dr. Mizan or other colleagues? We have been talking a lot. I think our focus so much is on climate adaptation, right? But now this is related to mitigation. Anyone would like to answer that? Mizan?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yes. Thank you very much. Building from what Dr. Rianti has mentioned about climate justice, the explanation, and also I think I want to relate this with the question from our colleague from Embassy of Switzerland, and also question from Director Texan. I think at the end of the day, with that explanation of climate justice, particularly the first one that Dr. Rianti already mentioned, I think the real question is, what would be the role of ASEAN for this, for ensuring the climate justice? Is it as another layer or as an enabler and accelerator of transfer of resources from those who have and those who have not, and also between those that are creating or contributing to the emission and also need to help with those that are experiencing the impact of climate change? What would be the role of ASEAN on this? My idea is, and within the mandate that's available in AHA Center or in DMHA or in other sectoral bodies of ASEAN, is what would be the potential transboundary cooperation that it's already there, and maybe the modalities that brings about the financial modalities brings about by by climate justice can be used for that. For instance, Dr. Yanti mentioned about the condition of Singapore. Yes, there is a potential of sea level rise. What would be the role of ASEAN if that scenario of forced migration from Singapore will happen? Then what kind of facilitation that ASEAN can do? I think that scenario planning, updating the risk assessment is already within the mandate that can be done. And at the end of the day, the real question is, then when it's happened, what would be the role of ASEAN? Is it as a broker to facilitate the climate justice modalities or accelerator? But there is also a risk that it becomes another layer of coordination. Just to throw some ideas and to enrich our conversation. Thank you.
Okay, any other views from other panelists or colleagues? Okay, LA, over to you.
Yes. So again, this climate justice is actually very important because this highlights that climate change is not just a purely environmental issue. Climate justice says that climate change is also a political and ethical issue, right? We have been seeing that actually there are some studies showing that right now, while we are currently experiencing COVID-19, there are very low global transportation. People are working from home. There is less travel happening. Yet, the amount of carbon emissions are not really decreasing, right? And it says that the biggest emitters are still out there, and as mentioned by Ibu Rianti, the effects are actually felt by those who are emitting less, like what we have seen in the Philippines, like what we have seen in the ASEAN region. Now, in my opinion, what we can do right now in terms of this, I think there is a very strong potential for the AHA Center as the regional knowledge hub of ASEAN to make this information, this knowledge more known. Because again, information should prompt actions. If we can make this information more known, allow the decision makers of the region to have access to this scientific information, then perhaps we can urge them to do more within the region so that we can actually do something about it. That's my opinion now for now, Ibu.
Okay, now let's shift to this one particular recommendation from Dr. Mizan in the main article of Armor, and that is about ASEAN shifting to forecast-based preparedness and humanitarian action. So there's a question from Gaynor from the AHA Center to Dr. Mizan. Would you like to answer that live? And that's about enhancing forecast-based analysis of hazards and the challenges with regard to data preparedness in the region. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for the question from Gainer. And I think this is really the prerequisite to my recommendations, and also uh, how and also if it will be taken upon by AHA Center or ASEAN at large. With regards to forecast, hazard forecast in this context, definitely continuous addition to sensors, hazard monitoring sensors, I mean, will always be great. It's a no regret investment. The more sensor at the ground level invested either by the countries or by the regional bodies, it will bring about benefits. But I want to talk the real challenge is about the limited data and information connectivities that are being used by the current system that already available in ASEAN. And what I want to say is that regardless of the advanced system that a center already employ in the EOC, regardless of what's already there in the ASMC and etc., there is always a limitation when this data and information, particularly for hazard and preparedness, is not really linked one to another. I think we saw it this year with the series of typhoon that LA already mentioned, but we also saw it even back in 2018 with the tropical storm thing that I mentioned. And this is really show how the limitation of the interplay between the system already available in AHA Center, what available in PDC, and how it's disconnect with the available sensors and system in the Mekong River Commission and also in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos at that time. Because given the situation, yes, we can do forecasts given our limitation. And at that time, we understand that the storm will bring about floods it already bring about flood in Philippines. It caused floods in Vietnam. But there is no other way that we can know that the dam would collapse if there is no interface between system that already available in AHA Center through PDC with those that are employed by MRC or Mekong River Commission. So again, the challenge is that one of the challenge for hazards. Now, with regards with data preparedness, again, I think the region still have a lots of homework in terms of improving and structuring the data, particularly related to the social and economic aspect of the ASEAN countries and ASEAN communities. So structuring data, data governance. We also talked about this last year in the ASEAN Big Data workshop. It's still there, and I think that's the priority in terms of improving data preparedness. Thank you.
Thank you, and perhaps I can turn to LA or Keith, data preparedness, and for that reason, you suggested to me to establish this AHA Center Information Management Working Group, AIM, that has been endorsed by the ASEAN Committee on Disaster Management. Perhaps either Keith or LA would like to talk about it and how we can actually address this issue of data preparedness so that we can improve forecast-based. We can move forward to forecast-based analysis. Over to you.
Yeah, Ibu, perhaps I could start, and then Sir Keith can join later. So I would like to join first with what Pak Mizan already mentioned. Actually, when in terms of impact-based forecasting, this is actually not new to the region. Several national meteorological and hydrological services within the region are already doing impact-based forecasting. One example is the Philippines, for example. Pag-asa in the Philippines, their tropical cyclone wind signal actually means what this strength of wind can do to your house, to your environment, what this impact will be if there will be a tropical cyclone wind signal number 4 in your community, for example. And Indonesia is also following. One example is when earlier this year, when there was a massive flooding in Indonesia, actually the BMKG, the National Meteorological and Hydrological Service of Indonesia, are producing maps showing with this amount of rainfall, these areas in Jakarta will be flooded. So this kind of technology, this kind of science is already available, and it is in there. Now, Pamizan mentioned that one challenge related to, for other countries to do so is the availability of the early warning hardware. Because for us to do impact-based forecasting, we need data. And this data, we need to gather this from the field. And for us to gather this from the field, we need the hardware that can actually capture all of this data. Now, in terms of of early warning hardware, I would like to link this with the very interesting information coming from the public earlier, that they are actually pushing for disaster resilient and climate adaptive infrastructure. The thing about early warning hardware and disaster resilient and climate adaptive infrastructure is it does not come cheap. Now, this is one challenge that currently everyone in the world is experiencing. Disaster resilient and climate adaptive infrastructure is not cheap, and those cheap options are not accessible to everyone. So that is one issue. We have seen several times that the Doppler radar of the Philippines actually broke because of the strong winds of super typhoons Haiyan in 2013 and even Goni just recently this year. So there were some damages incurred to the Doppler radar used by the Philippines. Now, in terms of the information sharing, and this would link to the question of Ibu Adelina, actually, in terms of information sharing, several times the member states and even the regional organizations really identified that we can do more if we share the information, right? And it is very important that there are actually enabling policies to do this. While there are efforts, there is we want to do this, we should also have that enabling policies that will actually enable the practitioners to do what they want. And actually, in the upcoming ADMAR work program 2021 to 2025, the ASEAN member states, the humanitarian partners, the regional centers, the AHA Center, everyone actually agrees that we should have strengthened information sharing with the existing technologies that we have. Currently, we have the ASEAN Disaster Monitoring and Response System, and we hope that with the upcoming ADMAR work program, we will be able to connect this system with the systems used by the ASEAN member states themselves, and there should be a free flowing of information that could actually help the practitioners save lives. And these are just on the technological level. There is also actually at the governance portion where information sharing is also equally important. When we are talking about information management, governance, that is where the AHA Center Information Management Network comes in. Because there are issues such as what are the data standards that we should be using, right? And currently at the ASEAN, there are several standards used by the different countries. When we are talking about affected persons in the Philippines, it does not necessarily mean the same when we're talking affected persons in Vietnam, for example. When we are talking about internally displaced population from one country, it may be different when it is used in another country. So we have to have this common understanding of the terms that we are using. And then when we convert this understanding towards the data that we are using, that is when we can have the data specification standards, what kind of data we are talking about, what format of data we are talking about, and how we are actually going to share this data. And that is where, again, information management governance comes in. That is where the AHA Center Information Management Network comes in.
Thank you very much. LA Keith, you want to add?
I would just like to add a bit, Ibu. Okay, so having worked firsthand with this information that LA mentioned, I guess some of the challenges that I've faced or experienced with managing the information from all 10 ASEAN member states is the difference, even in the smallest of terms, in the harmonization of data formats. So I would just like to give a kudos to LA as well as our consultant, Dr. Steve Ebner, for this project AIMNet, because I think this is very a step forward through the harmonization or centralization of information datasets that is crucial in disaster management. That is all, Ibu.
I think it's really important that we really strengthen the networks, as mentioned by Dr. Mizan, the networks among centers based in ASEAN, not only the ASEAN-born centers like AHA Center and the ASEAN Specialized Meteorological Center. We're already connected, right, between these two centers, but also other centers in ASEAN so that we can really improve our interconnectivity. And then at the second level will be also with the member states. we need to have this kind of like collectiveness. So one ASEAN One Response is not only about response on the ground, but one ASEAN One Response can also be about information, can also be about data preparedness. Can I now move to other question? And this is about the question about migration, about displacement. I think that there's one question there. Let me find. There's one question about migration. I think it was addressed to Dr. Mizan, but any of the panelists can talk about it. One of the articles in the Armor talk about displacement. Where should we go, right? And we talk about the issue of the sea rise to ASEAN countries. Anyone would like to tackle that question?
Yes, I think, and yes, thank you, Adelina. I'll try to contribute on this topic, and I also saw that the author of Pak Rum is also here, the one who also contribute a chapter on the displacement and also forced migration under the stress, under the influence of climate change. Of course, the long-term solution, I would say this goes beyond one sectoral bodies in ASEAN. It goes beyond the disaster management purview, and that requires a greater collaboration across sectors and even across pillars within ASEAN. And that one thing. But so the question is what can be done under the mandate and also under the operational scope of AHA Center or even the disaster management at large. And I think this is where improving vulnerability and risk assessment to understand the hotspots of the potential forced migration that adds the vulnerability aspect of the areas that already have high risk to various disasters will be crucial. And this is also where I think we have Dr. Green here, that we can now start to think how we can use some of the proxy, some of the modeling in terms of displacement trajectories contributing to the DMRS, for instance. I think that's another, that's a quick win that can be done. While the long-term solution, I would say that goes beyond, and that requires a greater homework across sectors and across pillars. Thank you.
Okay, there's going to be another webinar. So this is the first of 4 series. And one of them will focus on this article about displacement written by colleagues from Gajah Mada University, including Dr. Rum, who is here with us watching the webinar. So stay tuned to our announcement. That will be also a very interesting webinar. Dr. Joseph Green, would you like to add on to that? Over to you.
Yes, this is an excellent point and something we've begun to think quite a bit about at PDC. In fact, the way we are currently viewing these situations as they unfold actually globally are small scale, almost micro scale assessments that then can be plugged into the larger assessment of a member state, for example. So for example, we have done assessments in IDP camps where we look at the situation as it exists within the camp as almost a administrative district of a larger member state, for example. And then this allows kind of this, as I mentioned in my previous comments, this kind of unpacking of the vulnerabilities rather than just carving out a particular area where IDPs may currently reside as highly vulnerable. But as we know, how are they vulnerable and why are they vulnerable? And this allows us then to more focus our assistance in meeting the needs of those and also allows us to see how this may actually plug into the larger DRR riskscape of a member state, for example.
Okay, I would like to take again the question from Dr. Rum, the author of the article about displacement, where should we go? And he talked about the risk to engage in maladaptation, saying that is it right that we are only looking at the 1.5 degree increase because we might be on the road to 3 to 4 degrees of warming? Anyone to Anyone want to take that question? Ibu Rianti, okay. The author of the IPC report. Over to you.
I think I have to acknowledge first that this response is not, I think it's beyond my current position now. Yeah, so I think I will use my position as an IPCC author. Yes, of course. The reason why this 1.5 and 2 degree matters, that's because Paris agreement has mandated us to do so. But of course, I think the latest finding from this IPCC report states that we have reached now by 2017, 2018, 1.5, and we are on course to reach 1.1, and we are on course to reach 1.5 within mid-century. And if we continue business as usual, so when we say business as usual, this is about same rate, same volume of emission, we will continue to reach 3 and 4. And there is already studies that look at what's World Bank studies on it's titled turn down the heat. So what will be the consequences of 4 degrees? So it's very important. Then I think why this matters then? Because it matters. I think it's also related to climate action and advocacy, and it's also related to climate justice for, I think, small islands, low-lying development, low-lying countries, yeah, small island developing states. For them, like 2 is too late. Sea level rise will increase by 100 centimeters at of century. So for them to be in a safe position, to be able to continue their life, even not as usual, but just to survive, they need 1.5, and that's why this 1.5 and 2 matters. I guess on the discussion of maladaptation, that's why, again, this proxy of climate justice is important, because when climate change strategies, options that we develop now, it can be, adopting high technology, high advanced technology. But when it displaces people, it makes poor people lose their livelihood. In the long term, that can be considered maladaptation. And that's why I think one of the proxy to ensure that we don't lead to long-term future maladaptation is through ensuring that climate action now ensure justice and equity for those who are affected the most. So in this case, the poor, older people, sometimes women. Yes. So that's why I think this terminology of climate compatible development is important. So it's even bigger, integration of climate change adaptation, mitigation, and sustainable development, which is about leaving no one behind. So ensuring that climate justice, ensure that we don't leave no one behind. It's important because that's the only way that we don't have this maladaptation. So I think that's my response, Ibu Adelina.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. Just for your information, Dr. Muhammad Rum, I'm advertising your article here. Dr. Muhammad Rum, together with Dr. Daniel Pats from the Gajah Mada University, based in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, contributed the article number 8, and it is called Where to Go, Finding Durable Solution for Disaster Displaced Person in Southeast Asia. It's a very interesting article. We had a lot of debate within AHA Center when we reviewed this article. So look for this article and read it, and join the upcoming webinar. I think it's number 2 or number 3. Yeah, it's one of the 3 webinars coming up, and it will focus on this article among others. There's one more question that I would like the panelists to respond. I'm very sorry that we cannot answer all of the questions. Very interesting. So we'll try to answer it in one way or another. But this one coming from Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, Mr. Jarat Pritiviraj, for the question. And it talk about victim mindset. We have unintentionally, facilitated a victim mindset. And one of my colleagues from the Philippines mentioned in the Facebook that somehow we have facilitated the communities to think that there will always be assistance coming in, and they kind of like relaxed. So how to change this victim mindset, you know, from just a recipient, right? To become an active doers, because the issue is too large for just government to do alone. It requires a whole government approach. It requires all stakeholders. Otherwise, then we will lose the game. Anyone would like to answer that question? How to change this local mindset, the mindset of the local people? Dr. Green, over to you.
Thank you. This is an excellent question, and I'll give it a go, and we'll see. Maybe my other colleagues would like to join in after this. But I think one of the things that we could do better is when we do assessments, particularly at a subnational level, or when we work with DRR at the subnational level, working to highlight the successes in the communities for adaptation against disaster risk, or in this case, climate change, because there are a lot of individual and community level adaptations that are occurring, and then giving these groups and giving the stakeholders something to plug into larger. So putting them in touch with, you know, national disaster management organizations, highlighting their work in our technical reports, for example. So I think rather than taking a top-down approach where we're searching for vulnerabilities and we're searching for things that are wrong, also changing it slightly and looking at successes and looking at how indigenous knowledge, for example, can inform disaster risk reduction and confronting climate change. So I'll stop there and see if my colleagues have anything additional to add.
Anyone want to add? This is doing something practical at the local level, changing the mindset, requiring no high-tech investment.
Yes, yeah, I want to contribute on that, building on what Dr. Green has mentioned. I think one of the potential consideration for the region to reduce this mindset is actually to continue what ASEAN has been doing. And particularly, I want to cite the theme of ARDEX 18, actually, you know, that strengthening ASEAN collective response using national leadership. And by saying national leadership, that's also include, in my opinion, subnational and also local involvement. And that's where I think the essence of the current movement of localization comes into play as part of the World Humanitarian Summit commitment. And that's more on the value level. And now on the practical matter, I think one of the potential consideration to reduce this mindset is to open and be more inclusive with all the regional assets and also mechanics. I think when we also try to understand what would be the needs and challenges for the next 5 years in the UNMERWAR program, one of the recurring theme or questions from partners and even society at large is how disasters tools and mechanism in ASEAN can be more inclusive and can be more accessible by the public. And I think this is another way to provide dignity to the people that are potentially affected by disaster, to contribute to raise the capacity of the nation, to contribute data, for instance, maybe that can be done. So I think ASEAN is in the right trajectory actually to balance this victim mindset using the arrangement, because ASEAN always put the member state first, and hopefully that's include the community within the member state. So I think that's the way to go to continue the approach of ASEAN. Thank you.
Yeah, we have been experiencing disaster responding, recovering from disaster in the past decades, right? We have been the recipient. We need to turn that into to turn our hands and share. And by doing so, we need to actively engage at all levels, including at the local levels. So, anyone want to add before we go to the next session? I would love to continue the discussion, but time is up. Anyone? Okay, no? Okay, so Thank you so much again for the question. We are very sorry we cannot respond to all the questions, but thanks so much for submitting that. We'll see how we can respond to the question one way or another. Now we go to the next one that will be summary and takeaways, and I'm going to do that. I'm not prepared to summarize because there's so many insights coming from our authors and also from the audience, but I think it is very clear that the time is now for ASEAN as a community, not only the network of the 10 governments, but ASEAN as a community to act now against climate emergencies. And we should take climate emergencies not only from the disaster management lens, but also from other lenses, from the poverty eradication lens, from the SDG lens, right? From environmental biodiversity collapse lens. All of these are interconnected. And we should also stop doing it top down. It should be bottom up as well. And see how we can harness, the local wisdom, the innovations at the local level, change the mindset. While it is interestingly, coming out of the life poll that we need to do more on climate adaptive infrastructure. But there are also things that we can do, with low cost investment. And this include the rich social innovation, for example, that we have in this part of the region. We talk about the relationship of Sendai framework, SDGs, with risk factors and why it is so important for everyone to understand the risks around us. And this is not only governments, but other stakeholders, the business as well, the business community, how the local governments also advocate the risk. Advocacy is very important. It's not that people are not aware of the effect of climate change. They are. But I think one thing, as Greta said, the child from Europe has said and championed to us, we should listen to the scientists, not only listen, we should act on what the scientists have said to us. Isn't that enough? And we are presenting that in Armor, and that is zooming on ASEAN region. So the evidence is there, as our colleagues have said. It is time to act now. On anticipatory action, the recommendation from Dr. Mizan, I think that is really key, that we need to shift right now from being responsive, from being reactive to proactive. Look at the trigger points, not only at the regional contingency plans, not only at the regional scenarios, but also at the national and local level. Look at our action plan. Mark Lowcock has said, and Mark Lowcock is the chief of UN OCHA, it's a no-brainer. If we can do things early, before disaster hits, before crisis gets bigger, why can't we do it? We have the predictive analytics, we have the science supporting us. What we need is to improve our data preparedness, our forecasting technology, but the evidence is before us. Can we do something about it before disaster hits? 90%, more than 90% of our annual disaster in the ASEAN region are hydrometeorological disasters, such as floods, storms, drought, and these disasters can be anticipated. There is actually lead time. So we can do actually anticipatory action. We can do early action to allow for us to save more lives. So with all that, I hope that you enjoyed the discussion and you will look forward to the upcoming webinars that will talk about the other 7 articles of Armor. I'd like to thank our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that every one of you is busy, and particularly, the ASEAN family who are watching as well. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next week when we're going to adopt the ATMER work program for 2021-2025. Don't forget to also look at the ASEAN magazine, the recent publication launched by ASEAN Secretariat that talk about slow onset disasters and also disaster management in ASEAN. So with that, I'd like to invite LA, my colleague, to announce the third edition, the topics for the third edition of Armor next year. Over to you, LA.
Thank you, Ibu Adelina. 2020 has been an extremely challenging year for most of us, especially due to the current COVID-19 pandemic. In terms of humanitarian assistance and disaster response, COVID-19 challenged the norms, enabled innovations, and made us rethink. Unfortunately, COVID-19 will not be the last pandemic. As polar ice continues to melt due to climate emergency, prehistoric bacteria and viruses trapped in the permafrost will be freed. If a catastrophic disaster happens during a pandemic, are governments, humanitarian organizations, and communities ready? At the AHA Center, we aim to gather the scientific knowledge and experiences we gained during the current COVID-19 pandemic. And this will be the central theme of the ASEAN Risk Monitor and Disaster Management Review, or ARMOR, third edition for 2021. Now, we're calling on researchers and practitioners to ready your papers, and we've prepared some guide questions for you. Number one, whether the pandemic actually affected the disaster risk of the ASEAN member states. The articles may look at the risk calculation or profile and assess whether the changes in the risks are directly affected by the pandemic, and whether these changes in the risk affect the response. Number two, how might the pandemic change humanitarian action? This particular question can be approached by looking at two different perspectives, the national and international response. It would also be good to hone in on particular components of response, such as coordination, rapid assessment, evacuation or shelter management, logistics, etc. And the third one, how policies and innovations will enable technology to be used for an effective response during pandemic situations. Articles can specifically answer or provide solutions to the challenges mentioned in the previous questions, with a focus on allowing the implementation of technology. The articles can touch on the realm of policy, technology, reconfiguring organization structures, new standard operating procedures, localization, etc. More information regarding the call for abstracts will be available soon. Please stay tuned in our website and official social media platforms. ARMOR, Bridging Science and Decision Making.
Thank you so much, LA. I hope that the call for ARMOR third edition submission of articles interests our colleagues, particularly from the academic and scientific community. We're glad to have some of the universities based in ASEAN contributing to the second article. So we look forward to the submission for the third articles. It's not going to be just a publication, it's a journey. There's also discussion with the authors. There's also debate among us on how we take on the articles and help actually use the articles to help our work in ASEAN. So looking forward to that. Thank you very much, LA. With that, I'd like to conclude the webinar. I'd like to thank again all the panelists, the speakers who have joined me in today's session. Thank you so much for your time. I'd like to thank all the other authors coming not only from the partner organization who have worked with the AHA Center, but also from new partners who have not worked for AHA Center, with the AHA Center before. I also would like to specially mention that we have contributors who happen to be an intern working for AHA Center from Singapore, and another author coming from Thailand, and she's a graduate of the AHA Center Executive Program, contributing on article, one of the articles in the ARMOR. So we have actually a variety of contributors, and we want to see this more variety in the next edition of Armor. Thank you so much again. I hope that you have a safe week ahead, and let's do together to act now against climate emergency. Thank you, and have a safe week ahead. Bye. Oh, and can I request for panelists to stay? We would like to have a group photo. Thank you.
Okay, it's